Bernard Arnault has destroyed competitors, outmaneuvered governments, and turned grief and nostalgia into a $500 handbag. He is, by every measure, the most powerful man in fashion history. But here's what nobody tells you: the life he actually lives, even wilder than the brands he owns. The boy from Roubaix who bought Paris. For years, Bernard Arnault was known for driving a humble little car around Paris purely to avoid attention, even though his garage could hold a Bugatti Chiron worth around $3.3 million. Ferraris, an Aston Martin, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, and a Mercedes Pullman. That's the whole man in one image. The wealth is volcanic, the personality is a whisper, the fortune screams, but the man barely raises his voice. And the question this entire story sets out to answer is simple but enormous. How does a whisper end up owning everything? Because make no mistake, he owns everything. He owns a 333-foot superyacht called Symphony. It was built in 2015 by the Dutch shipyard Feedship, refitted in 2022, and cost roughly $150 million, and owning it is only half the bill. Just keeping it floating costs between $10 and $15 million every single year. Fuel, crew, maintenance, insurance, the endless tax of perfection. It holds 20 guests across 8 cabins and carries a crew of 38, an entire small workforce living at sea just to serve a single family. And the centerpiece is the kind of thing you'd expect in a science fiction film. A 6-meter glass-bottomed infinity pool with a waterfall, which forms a glowing ceiling for the beach club sitting directly below it. Swim above, and someone is lounging beneath you, looking up through the water at your silhouette. You'd think one floating palace would be enough for any human being. It wasn't. In early 2026, reports surfaced that Arnault commissioned a brand new mega yacht, around 143 meters, for a reported $650 million, a vessel that would dwarf the one he already had and rank among the largest private ships on the planet. Then there's the island. Not a beach house, an island. Indigo Island in the Bahamas, 133 acres, bought all the way back in 1999 for around $137 million. A private slice of the Caribbean. Far from cameras, far from crowds, far from the world that would love nothing more than a photo of him in swim trunks, and the houses spread across the map like pins on a conqueror's board. His main Paris residence is valued at around $200 million, with expansive gardens, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, tennis courts, and interiors built to display his art. A home that reportedly took over a decade to perfect, because for this man, good enough simply doesn't exist. There's the historic Chateau Cheval Blanc in Bordeaux, acquired in 1998, sitting on over 12 acres of vineyards and valued at more than $200 million. A seafront villa in the exclusive gated community of Les Parcs de Saint-Tropez, a 34-room ski retreat in Courchevel with a heated pool, sauna, and jacuzzi. Around 5 properties in Los Angeles, worth roughly $125 million in total, including a single $121.5 million modern mansion in Trousdale Estates, and a $22 million estate in the Hamptons. 3 continents, mountains, vineyards, beaches, and a private island. And tying it all together, a fortune that has, at moments, made him the single wealthiest human being on the planet, with a net worth that floats somewhere in the $150 to $200 billion range, rising and falling with the company that built it. So here's the thing you have to understand before we go any further. None of this, not the yacht, not the island, not the mansions, not the title of richest man alive, started anywhere near luxury. It started in the rain. Bernard Jean-Étienne Arnault was born on March 5, 1949, in Roubaix, France, a gray industrial town in the north of the country, the kind of place built around factories and damp weather, not runways and champagne. He wasn't born into silk, he was born into concrete. His father, Jean Arnault, ran a civil engineering and construction company called Ferret Savinol, pipes, buildings, roads, the unglamorous skeleton of a working city. If you'd walked through that town and pointed at the Arnault boy and said, "One day he'll own Dior, Tiffany, and Louis Vuitton," people would have laughed in your face. But one thread of glamour was quietly stitched into that childhood. His mother, Marie-Joseph, had a fascination with Dior. Imagine it. A woman in a northern factory town, surrounded by industry and rain, quietly in love with the most elegant fashion house in all of Paris. A dream of beauty in a place built on function. And she gave her son one more gift on top of that. She made sure he received classical piano training. Hold on to both of those details. The Dior, the piano, they seem like nothing. A mother's small obsessions. But they come back to define this man's entire life in ways no one in that house could have dreamed. named. Young Bernard was sharp, not artist sharp, at least not on the surface. He was math sharp, the kind of mind that takes a problem and instantly starts cracking it into clean, logical pieces. He graduated from the prestigious École Polytechnique, one of France's top engineering schools, in 1971. Picture France's version of MIT, crossed with a military academy, crossed with the quiet club that actually runs the country. You don't enroll there to become a fashion king. You go there to become an engineer, a technocrat, a builder of systems. And at first, that's exactly what he became. He joined the family construction business and climbed fast. Director in 1974, CEO in 1977, and chairman in 1978, at just 29 years old. Most men would have settled there. A successful regional construction firm, a comfortable name, a comfortable life. But comfort was never the plan. Here's the first crack of lightning that showed Arnault was wired completely differently from every other heir to a family business. Around 1974 to 1976, he convinced his father to sell off the industrial construction division for about 40 million French francs and pivot the entire company toward real estate, especially holiday accommodations and timeshares. The firm was renamed Trillionaire. Think about the nerve that takes. He looked at the business that had fed his family for a generation, the thing his father built, and he calmly said, "This is the past. The future is somewhere else." And his father listened. Then came the chapter that turned a clever businessman into a legend in the early 1980s. He left for the United States. He went partly to escape France's socialist policies of the era, and while he was there, he studied leveraged buyouts and began spotting undervalued luxury assets. Sit with that picture. A French engineer in America, quietly learning the dark art of buying entire companies with borrowed money, studying which prestigious old names were poorly run and ripe for the taking. He wasn't on vacation. He was loading the gun, and in 1984, he fired it. At age 35, Arnault used about $15 million of his own and family money, backed by the powerful bank Lazard Frères, to acquire the bankrupt textile conglomerate Boussac Saint Frères for roughly $80 million, a deal that symbolically involved a single franc, plus the assumption of its enormous debt. Now, why on earth would a sharp young man chase a bankrupt textile company? Why bet everything on a sinking ship? Because of the treasure buried in the hull. Boussac owned the iconic but struggling Christian Dior fashion house, along with the legendary Le Bon Marché department store. There it is. Dior, his mother's obsession. The boy from the rainy factory town had just bought the very house she used to dream about. The most poetic acquisition in business history, and he did it not out of sentiment, but out of cold surgical strategy. Because he didn't buy Dior to frame it on a wall and admire it. He bought it to fix it, and the fixing was brutal. He restructured aggressively, selling off most of the non-core assets and firing around 9 dear workers out of roughly 22. That's not trimming, that's amputation. And the cuts were severe enough to earn him a chilling nickname that would follow him for years. He became known as the Terminator. The criticism was loud and relentless. He was accused of asset stripping, of being heartless, of treating a proud French institution like a spreadsheet to be optimized. In a country where business was supposed to be gentlemanly and slow, here was a young man moving like a predator. But the spreadsheet worked. By 1987, the businesses he'd kept had turned profitable, with revenues climbing past $112 million. The bankrupt gamble had become a money machine. And in the wreckage and the profit, Arnault learned the single most important lesson of his life, the one that would build everything that came after. He learned that heritage luxury brands were almost magical assets, names that had taken a century to build, carrying prestige that money literally cannot manufacture from scratch, often run badly by people who treated them like fragile museum pieces instead of engines of profit. They were sitting there all over France and Italy, undervalued and underpowered, just waiting for someone with the nerve to take them, protect their soul, and run their finances like a ruthless machine. He had the nerve, he had the playbook, he had in Dior, his proof of concept. Now all he needed was something far bigger to point it all at, a stage worthy of the empire taking shape in his mind. He found it in a fragile new company called LVMH, and the way he seized control of it was so cold, so calculated, that it would change the rules of French business forever. The Wolf in Cashmere. In 1987, a brand new company was born out of a marriage that was already quietly falling apart. That year, the champagne and cognac house Moet Hennessy merged with the leather goods house Louis Vuitton to form a single giant, LVMH. On paper, it looked like a glorious union of two French crown jewels, bubbles and luggage, both dripping with prestige. In reality, it was two proud captains who couldn't stand each other, both gripping the wheel of one ship, sailing in opposite directions. It was an internal power struggle between Moet Hennessy's Alain Chevalier and Louis Vuitton's Henri Racamier. And here is a rule that runs through all of Arnault's story. When two giants are busy wrestling each other, a third, quieter man can slip into the room and walk out with the crown. Arnault was invited to invest amid the disputes. They wanted him as a friendly ally, a peacekeeper with deep pockets, a calm outsider who could help break the deadlock. He smiled. He agreed. He wrote the checks. They had absolutely no idea what they had just welcomed through the door. He partnered with the British company Guinness, quietly bought up warrants and shares, and built his stake to around 43.5%. And then came the moment that revealed his almost supernatural sense of timing. He outmaneuvered his rivals during the 1987 market crash, Black Monday, when LVMH stock got cut in half. While the rest of the world watched their screens turn red and panicked, while everyone else was selling in terror, Arnault saw something else entirely. He saw a fire sale on the most valuable luxury company in existence. He didn't flinch. He bought the falling knife with both hands. By 1989, he had become chairman and CEO of the entire group after ousting Racamier, who later sued him with limited success. Let that sink in. The man invited in to keep the peace had taken the whole kingdom for himself. The peacekeeper was the conqueror all along. Courts even described some of his maneuvers as irregular, though they were ultimately ruled legal. In France's gentlemanly, slow-moving business culture, his tactics were viewed as shockingly aggressive, too cold, too ruthless, too American. They didn't have a category for a man like this, but it didn't matter what they called him. He had won, and the empire was now his to build. And build he did, with LVMH as his weapon and his war chest. The boy from Roubaix launched a hunting spree that would last 3 decades and reshape the entire luxury world. His strategy even had a name: Star Brands. The idea was to acquire iconic, timeless names, preserve their creative freedom while centralizing the financial control, and then expand them aggressively across the globe, with a special hunger for Asia. It was a kind of beautiful contradiction. Let the designers dream without limits. He would handle the cold mathematics behind the curtain. Art on the surface, ruthless accounting underneath, and the math was relentless. Through the 1990s, he absorbed Givenchy, Kenzo, Loewe, Celine, and Berluti. He built a watches and jewelry division, snapping up Tag Heuer in 1999, and grew the beauty retail giant Sephora. One by one, the great names of European luxury fell under a single roof. Then the deals got even bigger, the numbers more staggering. Bulgari in 2011, for around $5 billion. Loro Piana, the maker of impossibly fine cashmere, in 2013, for $2.6 billion. The luggage maker Rimowa in 2016. The Belmond Hotel Group in 2018 for $3.2 billion, a deal that brought along the legendary Orient Express and Venice's iconic Cipriani. Brick by gilded brick, the empire rose. And then came the masterpiece, the deal that crowned the whole thing. In 2021, LVMH acquired the American jeweler Tiffany & Co. for $15.8 billion, the largest luxury acquisition in history. The little blue box, that perfect symbol of American romance, now belonged to a Frenchman from Roubaix. By the time the dust settled on 3 decades of conquest, LVMH had grown into a colossus of more than 75 prestigious brands, reporting 84.7 billion euros in revenue in 2024. A single company holding the dreams of the entire luxury world in its hands. But here's the part the glossy highlight reels always skip past. Bernard Arnault did not win every single battle. The wolf got bloodied more than once, and how he handled losing tells you more about him than any victory. The most famous wound was Gucci. Between 1999 and 2001, Arnault built a stake of around 34% in what became known as a creeping takeover, slowly accumulating shares, tightening his grip, getting closer and closer to swallowing the Italian fashion house whole. He wanted Gucci badly. He could practically taste it. But his great rival François Pinault, the man behind the empire now called Kering, stepped in and beat him to it. And here's the part that's almost unbelievable. Even in defeat, Arnault walked away having sold his shares for roughly a $700 million profit. He lost the war and still pocketed a fortune. That's how the man operates. Even his failures pay him. Then there was Hermès, the one house that refused to be conquered, the white whale that got away. In the 2010s, Arnault quietly built a stake of around 17% using clever financial instruments called equity swaps, creeping up on the family that controls the brand. When the Hermès family finally realized the wolf was at their door, they didn't roll over. They fought back ferociously, and a French court eventually forced Arnault to sell off most of his shares. He sold at a profit, naturally, but he never got control. To this day, Hermès remains a rival that actually outperforms LVMH on some measures. Proof that even the king of luxury has a ceiling. He stumbled in the digital world too. During the dot-com bubble, he poured money into ventures like Boo.com, losing over $30 million when it collapsed into bankruptcy almost immediately, along with other internet flops. The master of handbags and champagne was, at least for a moment, lost in the world of websites. But here's what truly separates Arnault from nearly everyone else who's ever played this game. The losses never seemed to stick to him. Gucci became a $700 million profit. Hermès became a profit. The internet flops were a rounding error against the scale of his empire. He absorbed body blows that would have crushed lesser men, brushed them off, and kept building. Because his true genius was never in any one deal. It was in his patience and his discipline. His philosophy was almost frightening in its simplicity. Buy forever. Don't buy to flip. Buy the brand. Protect the brand. Hold the brand for 100 years and let it compound into something unimaginable. And he didn't just bet on luxury either. Quietly, away from the runways, through his family's investment arm, he made early stakes in Netflix, in ByteDance, the company behind TikTok, in Spotify, Airbnb, and Slack. The engineer from Roubaix had quietly become one of the sharpest investors alive in any field, not just the world of leather and perfume. So by now the shape of the man is clear. Ruthless when ruthlessness was required, patient beyond all reason, willing to lose a single battle in order to win the entire war. A whisper that swallowed an industry, but an empire built on this scale raises one terrifying, unavoidable question. What happens to all of it when the king is finally gone? Because Bernard Arnault was never just building a company. He was building a dynasty, and the cold, brilliant way he engineered his own family to inherit it is stranger and more calculated than almost anything in the business pages. The Dynasty and the Quiet King. Bernard Arnault has 5 children, and every single one of them works for him. Delphine, Antoine, Alexandra, Frédéric, and June, all 5 hold significant executive roles within LVMH. This is not a story of rich kids handed vanity titles and left to play. He has spent their entire lives quietly grooming them for war. They were trained from a young age through store visits, business trips, and strategy discussions. And the rule he set for them is brutally, beautifully simple. They don't get handed the kingdom just for being born into it. He insists they must deserve it. Look at where each of them sits today, and you'll see a father who placed his children like a chess master placing pieces. Delphine, the eldest and his only daughter, became CEO of Christian Dior in 2023, handed the crown of the very house her grandmother worshipped from a rainy factory town. The circle closing. Antoine heads communications and image for the whole group and serves as CEO of the family's holding company, Christian Dior SE. Alexandra took an executive vice president role at Tiffany & Co., helping to reinvent the very jewel his father had just conquered. Frédéric runs LVMH's watch division, commanding names like Tag Heuer. And the youngest, Jean, leads marketing and development for Louis Vuitton watches, still climbing, still proving himself. But it's not the titles that reveal his genius, it's the cage he built around them. In 2022, Arnault restructured the family holding company, Agache, into a limited partnership, giving each of his 5 children an equal 20% stake. Perfectly equal. No favorites, no heir apparent towering over the others. And then he added the chains that make the whole thing unbreakable. The shares cannot be sold for 30 years without unanimous consent. And major decisions require the full agreement of all 5. Stop and really think about how cold and brilliant that is. He has forced his children to cooperate. He has made betrayal mechanically impossible. Not one of them can sell out. Not one can break away and cash in. Not one can wage war on the others without freezing the entire fortune solid. To touch the wealth, all 5 must agree, which means the family can only ever move as a single body. One will, one direction. The structure is reportedly inspired by Sartre's play No Exit, a story about people locked in a room together for eternity, unable to leave one another. He looked at every other great dynasty that tore itself apart from the inside, the bitter feuds, the lawsuits, the families that destroyed in one generation what took 3 to build, and he engineered a structure where that simply cannot happen. He turned his bloodline into a fortress with the doors welded shut, and he is in no hurry to hand over the keys. Arnault extended his own retirement age to 85, keeping himself firmly at the helm until roughly 2034. The king is not abdicating. He is simply slowly, patiently teaching the princes how to hold a crown that heavy without dropping it. And how does he teach them? Not in boardrooms full of strangers, through monthly private lunches at LVMH headquarters that function as family strategy sessions, where he quizzes his children rigorously on the business. Picture that family meal. No idle chatter about the weather. No, how was your weekend? Instead, a pop quiz on margins and markets and brand strategy delivered by the richest man alive, to children who know that one day this empire will rest entirely on their shoulders. Love expressed as a stress test. So with all of this, the power, the wealth, the cage of gold he's built for his heirs, how does the man himself actually live? And here, in the answer, is the final twist of the whole story. He lives quietly. Yes, the assets surrounding him are staggering. The 333-foot yacht, the private island, the Paris mansion that reportedly took over a decade to perfect, and the art. Oh, the art. A collection personal and corporate combined, worth over 1 billion euros, featuring giants like Picasso, Warhol, and Basquiat. Much of it housed inside the breathtaking Frank Gehry designed Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris, which opened to the public in 2014, a soaring glass building that is, in a way, his gift to the world, a private passion turned into a public cathedral of art. But the man at the center of all this opulence, he is almost monk-like in his habits. He plays tennis every week, he watches his weight, he works constantly, relentlessly, no wild excess, no scandal, just discipline again and again. And remember that piano his mother insisted on, back in the rainy north? It never left him. He's a lifelong classical music enthusiast who reportedly won over his wife, the accomplished concert pianist Hélène Mercier, by playing Chopin for her. The math-minded engineer, the cold strategist they called the Terminator, courting his future wife with the keys his mother first sat him down at as a boy. And it's why his greatest toy, that enormous floating palace, isn't named after a god or a conquest or himself. It's named Symphony. The boy who learned piano in Roubaix grew up and named his $150 million yacht after music. The whole man, hidden in a single word. He sees himself in his own framing, not merely as a businessman but as an ambassador of French heritage. And he doesn't just say it, he backs it with staggering sums. When the Notre Dame Cathedral burned in 2019, Arnault and LVMH pledged 200 million euros toward its restoration. He led LVMH's sponsorship of the Paris 2024 Olympics, draping his empire and his nation together for the entire world to see. The brand and the country, forever intertwined in his mind. So let's go all the way back to where we started, to that man in the small, modest car, getting waved away from his own building by people who didn't recognize him. That image is the answer to the entire riddle. Bernard Arnault was never chasing the appearance of wealth. The ordinary rich man buys the loudest car so the world will turn and stare. Arnault drove the quiet one because being noticed was a weakness, a distraction, a liability. His genius was never about spending the money anyone can spend. His genius was the cold, patient, almost inhuman discipline of building it, brand by brand, decade by decade, child by child, welding it all into something engineered to outlive him by 100 years. The boy from the rainy factory town didn't simply buy his mother's favorite fashion house. He turned it into the cornerstone of the largest luxury empire on earth. And then he locked his own bloodline inside it so tightly that it can never be lost, never be sold, never be torn apart. That isn't a trillionaire's spending spree. That's something far rarer and far stranger. That's a man who looked at the most beautiful things in the entire world. The silk, the diamonds, the champagne, the art, the music his mother gave him, and decided he didn't just want to own them for a while. He wanted to own them forever. Which part of Bernard's life inspired you the most? Share in the comments and click on the cards on screen for more.